So just checking the mic and the levels and shit like that. Bring that down a bit. Yeah, that seems good. Test. Yeah, that's good enough. So I've been playing with a few different ideas of doing like splitting frequencies and everything in my bass design. So I thought I would run through the process of building a track and we'll just kind of see where we get to making a bass track. So we're going to start off with a Reese bass, as you generally always do when you're doing sound design. So before I get started, I'll just make sure the correct things are open. And I've noticed there's not that many, there's not really that many NeuroBass stuff that lately. So yeah, anyway, cool. I'm thinking on YouTube anyway, I haven't seen many new ideas for the sound design popping up. But so what I'm doing is to make a Reese bass. The basic idea is you take like a different waveform. It doesn't matter what synthesizer you use, but something with at least 2 oscillators, and then you just detune them. So in this instance, we'll use operator because that'll do the job pretty easily. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up all the oscillators so they run parallel, so there's no FM going on. So normally with operator, you start off with a sine wave, and then the second oscillator, oscillator B, will modify that sine wave. But that's not what we're doing here. We're going to route it so each one just goes straight to the filter. So let's change levels to -12 for A and B, -18 for C and D. Set them all to square waves or saw, it really doesn't matter. It's annoying we can't copy the value to siblings there, but that's no problem. So now they're just completely tuned in. Turn the filter off or turn it up, so it's not like cutting out the frequencies. That's a bit annoying. Now we're going to detune them. And you should just do it to taste, but in this case, 5 degrees for the B to A, then C, let's make it like, I don't know, 10. And for D, let's make it a bit more extreme, like 15. And it gives us a cool sort of phasing sort of relationship going on. I'm wondering if there's any way to change the triggering. And feedback's a cool one to play with if you want to fatten it up. Like if we just leave A and B, check it out. Pretty cool. Yeah, anyway. So we've got a Reese, basically. We've detuned it. You can add some spread. Maybe turn glide on. And of course have it in mono, so set voices to 1. And another thing I like to do is to go into the pitch bend, and instead of having it 5 semitones, set it to 12 so you can do a full octave bend, and then we can get some cool modulation happening. So I'm just using in the key of E because I like using E. I know the notes pretty well. And I'm just going to draw in a couple of long notes, and then we're going to play with some pitch bend. So going to envelopes, open up MIDI control, and it'll automatically bring you to pitch bend. What you can do is use the pitch bend almost like an envelope to give it a really punchy attack. It's the same idea behind kick drums. And if you make it really short. And we're going to put in some more bends. Maybe Drag it out, give it a bit of movement. Hey dude, what's up? Just making some NeuroBassy sort of sounds. Yeah, so we're just going to be putting in some like random little pitch wobbles and shit like that to start off with. Just to give it a bit of movement basically, and I'm not being too concerned about the actual notes involved. That'll do. Okay, we can loop that. And like, it kind of sounds cool already. And we could do the same thing with wavetable. I'll just demonstrate with that. So we've got a new instance of wavetable, setting both oscillators, turning them both on, setting them to square, detune by like, I don't know, 6 degrees, turn the sub on, the same octave range. It's actually pretty loud, I'll turn it down a bit. And if we turn unison on to classic, it's going to sound really cool. But of course we didn't change the pitch bend, so I set that to 12. It's a cool sound just straight up on its own. Alright, but another thing we can do to make it more punchy is to apply envelope 2 to the pitch. So you go into the matrix, find pitch, line it up with envelope 2, set it to 48 and shorten the decay, make it real short, like 150. It just gives a bit of punch to it. It's the same idea behind making a kick drum. So we'll stick with the wavetable one because it's just a nice sound, though we'll turn it to. It's actually really powerful if you have unison turned off. It doesn't have that cool width, but it's got a cool tone. Alright, so let's continue working on it. Let's just call it Reese. That'll do. Alright, sick. So the very first step, I'm kind of going off a little bit of a notepad that I wrote down last night while I was thinking of shit. So we're going to split the signal into 2. So add an auto filter, or you can do it with like an EQ or a whole bunch of shit. Put it in a group and duplicate it so there's 2 chains. So we have a low and we have mids and up. So the mids and up we're going to set to a high pass filter and put it at like maybe 240. So it's cutting the bass end. For the low, we're going to be like fiddling with it a bit. So put the low into a group, and in that group, name it sub control. Now, map the frequency to macro 1, and the resonance to macro 2. So now we have a little group where we can control our subs. Go into mapping and set it to 100% for the resonance. And this is where it gets quite cool. We're going to actually tune the notes like specifically so we get this like massively boomy sort of effect. The way to do that is to use the frequency control and resonance to highlight or emphasize certain frequency points. Now, for instance, a low E, which is that first note we're playing, is like 41 hertz or so. So we're going to bring the frequency down and we're going to find about 41 or so. And then we're going to boost the shit out of the resonance. Okay. So set the resonance to like 40 and it'll really kick. And we could even make it punchier and even like just drive the shit out of it. Check it out. Actually, you could have a bit of fun with that if you set it to like a triplet grid and you can actually make it line up with the beat. So you give it a punch. but we're not going to do that. At the moment, we're just playing with the specific tuning of it. And now, if we want to reduce the power, we can actually kind of slide off the resonance to make it not so boomy. Okay, so let's make a little bit of rhythm. And for the frequency, goes up the octave at this note, I think. So when you're calculating frequencies, it's really easy to know that if you double a frequency, it goes up an octave. So if 41 or so is the frequency of E1, then 82 or so will be the frequency of E2. See? And we can actually slide it down. That last part, and then I've just got to check the MIDI control. Yeah, it goes up a little bit there, so. And let's do some resonance control as well. Goes down a little bit there, so I think it's about there. Let's just bring it down. Alright, let's check the sub. And we bring it back up. See where there was like a little bit of drive happened there because the resonance is peaking a bit too hard. Let's look at it on an EQ. So I don't want any distortion. I want it to be clean. But yeah. So just by doing that, we've got this really cool like sub control going on. So if we solo it, this is just the sub. It sounds really sick to me. Like my headphones are really letting it pop. Bring that up a bit. Yeah, especially I like the start. Little whomps happening there, that's cool. And, okay, so, oh, god damn it. You should never use your push as a notebook stand. That's a problematic thing. You're gonna have issues if you do that. Okay, so we've got a group that, oh, that's savage. All right. So in the second group, we'll call it, and the first thing we've got to do is map the frequency. And we don't want it to go all the way to the bottom. Let's have it a minimum of 120. But we'll keep it at like 200 for the time being because it's nice to have that separation. And even if we widen it, that's cool, but we will have to put a utility on and set it to mono. And remember, when you widen things, you are taking out some of the power of the bass, but it's all right in this instance. Give the frequency a little bit higher. And a little bit more resonance. Just make it savage. Like on a really good speaker system, that'd sound sick. that's nice and fat. I like that. All right. So what are we up to now? So we should probably compress what's going on there. So I'm just going to drop in a really simple compressor. Yep. Just normal compression, nothing fancy happening. And I'll just loop a little small part. That'll do. Solo the low. Yeah, so we're pulling back a little bit. Give it an attack of like 50 milliseconds. And say a release of 100, that should be enough to tame it. And look at the knee just to get an idea. Yeah, see, we're not compressing it very heavily. It's just enough so if all of a sudden it peaks like mad, we're going to have a little bit of control happening. I mean, let's face it, we can't like do ridiculous limiting on it, at least at this early stage. But if we just control it a little bit, we won't have any problems. All right, so now we've got the compression done. We've got a utility setting it to mono, and we've got the auto filter. So before I go any further, I'm just going to name things. Mono, sub control, sub compression. Yeah, it's actually really important to name things, because otherwise you have issues. Okay, and this is going to be a fairly complicated rack, so I'm going to be writing notes in the info text, which is a really helpful thing. So when you have a group, you can right click on above the macro section, and you have the edit info text option, which is great, because sometimes things can get confusing. So I'm just putting some notes there. Boom. Low pass filter, controlling sub boost, use freak to select boosting sub, use Q to control amount of the boost. Cool, that'll do. That's enough that I understand what's going on there. And let's color them. I don't know. I don't even know what a subby color is. If anyone knows what like a nice color for a sub is, they should let me know. But I'm guessing, I don't know, when I think of subs, I think of kind of like purple colors. Probably makes no sense. But yeah, we'll go purple colors for our subs. And incidentally, that happened to be the case anyway. All right. So let's have a look again. You can really see that pump hitting in, so that's pretty cool. Good. All right. Okay. I thought I would show just some of the sounds that I've kind of what I'm aiming for. So this is just a track I've kind of been fiddling with a friend. The drums sound like this. He put like a lot of reverb on it, and the bass sounds like this. So that's the kind of tone that we'll eventually be getting out of this Reese when we get there. Though it'll take a little bit of work to get us that far, but that's kind of what we're aiming for. This sort of really mobile. Yeah, a lot of movement happening there. So that's kind of the target to bear in mind. So far we just have a really simple sub and mid split. Sub sounds like this. And it's really cutting everything except for the fundamental frequency, which is what we want. And then we have the mids. And so far that's kind of ridiculously simple. So what we're going to do is build a filtering rack that we can get some stuff happening on to get that really cool filter movement. So what I'm doing is I'm dropping in auto filter and an LFO, and I'm going to make some duplicates of them. You can forget those two for the time being. The next step in this process is using a morph. Now, the best way to explain it is you have your low pass filter, which filters out anything above the cutoff point. You have a high pass filter, which does the same below the cutoff point. And you have a band pass filter that only allows stuff around the cutoff point. What a morph does is it allows you to move between them. For instance, and that's cool because you can get some really interesting tones. Like if I set it to have it in the center at like 0 BP here and just draw in some shit with the filter. Set it to 16ths. We can get some really cool movement. For instance, dun, 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 dun. Yeah, so this is just some automation curves. Yeah, so it's kind of cool. That's just band pass movement. And if we set it to a 12 dB slope, it becomes more of kind of a fuzzy sort of affair. And you kind of hear more of the transient come through, right? Like it's the sharpness passes. But what I've found is if you use the morph, you can get a real cool punchiness to it that's kind of similar to how you use pitch bend. So we get a bit of hit. It's almost like a shaker or something. Just duplicate that over. And obviously not every single note. I put the triplets in the wrong spot. They should have been there. And sharpen it up. Like, I think that sounds pretty cool, and it's given it that extra punch. And we can do the same thing by occasionally turning it into a low pass. and making it sweep the whole way. And we can take it even further by like, just for a whole beat, having it go up the entire spectrum like this. Yeah, so that's some of the stuff you can get with an auto filter using the morph, and that's pretty cool, I think. So we are going to be doing that, but in a more kind of controlled way. So we're going to put the auto filter and the LFO into a group, and we're going to use the LFO to control the morphing function, because I find it's actually a lot easier when you've got percentages. So click on map, select morph, and then have the range go from 0 to 50%. So now when we control the offset, we move from low pass at -100, band pass at 0, and at +100, it's a high pass. And it gives us a bit more control. And it's just, honestly, the reason I like doing that is because it just makes it really easy to understand. So we're going to map the frequency to macro 1, and then on macro 1 we can put that automation back in. And we are going to map the offset of the LFO to macro 2. Rename these things, call it filter 1 and filter 1 morph control. And here we can call it filter 1 freak, not ferric, freak, short for frequency, and filter 1 morph. Now it should be obvious by the naming conventions that I'm using that we're going to be using more than one filter, but for the time being this works. So set the morph to 0%, draw in some punchiness, and by shortening the range of the morph control, we actually have a much finer amount of control. It's very granular. Whereas if 100% was back to low pass, we'd lose a lot of that control. And we're going to map resonance to macro 3 because we might want to use that later on. Just call it Q or filter 1 Q, I suppose. And one thing that we'll be doing is we might in the process want to change from a 24 dB to a 12 dB slope. And I think it's good to use some gain control on that, because the 12 dB slope is like much louder than the 24. So we're going to use utility and the slope control. And we're going to map slope and map the utility on or off to macro 4 and set them both to 1. So what this means is that when they're set to 0, utility is turned off and it's a 12 dB slope, sounds like this. And if it's anything above 1, including 1, the macro is turned on. So the gain's pretty similar now. It's more like the definition is smaller, if you kind of know what I mean. Okay, so that's the first filter rack done. I don't know, let's make them blue colors. That'll do. And for macro 4, call it like slope 12/24 D capital B. The idea is we just want to keep things as easy to understand as possible. Call the rack filter 1. All right, now we're doing another one. So grab the LFO and the filter that we put there, Open them both up, turn them on. These will be filter 2, which is going to be a similar idea, but it will be morphing instead. So turn them into a group. This morph will be focused around a notch filter rather than a bandpass filter. Otherwise, it's a pretty similar concept. So map it to morph, turn depth off, turn rate off, and right now it's centered on notch because notch is 75% when you're like looking at the controls. And just for the sake of demonstration, let's just draw in some crap with the frequency control so you get an idea of how this notch will be affecting the sound. That'll do. I think it makes it sound kind of wet or something. So this is dry. Wet. And it's basically like modulating a phaser by hand, but it gives you a different sort of vibe. We can also change the resonance. If we set it to 0, it's cutting out more. And if we set it to like 20%, it's a more defined cut. And the higher we get, the less it's cutting. I like it to be like 20% or so, maybe even 10, because we want it to be a fairly brutal cut, because this one will be really controlling the sound quite a bit. So again, we are going to copy the envelope, map the frequency to macro 1, and put the envelope back in. And we are going to be running the offset in the same process. So because I've set it from 100 to 50%, it still means that low pass is at negative 100% and high pass is positive 100. And that means we can use it as just like a normal filter sometimes, which is cool. So I'm just going to draw in some stuff just to see what it's like. What has happened there? You know what? Forget that. Let's just immediately map the offset to macro 2. And we can draw that in just to see what happens. Though honestly, I'm going to be using less morphing controls for filter 2 than filter 1. But yeah, we're getting a fair bit of movement there now. I'm now renaming, so filter 2 frequency, filter 2 morph. We're not going to bother with the slope controls because I know for a fact that I won't be changing it. Give that a similar but different color. Let's make it that pinky sort of thing. Name it filter 2. And that's the basis of the filtering, but now we're going to add some kind of secondary tone control sort of things. Again, we'll be using auto filter plus LFO, and again we'll be morphing, but this time it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to go from 50 to 100% again, set it to morph, map there like so. But we're going to set the depth to like 25%, and the resonance will make it a fair bit higher. Let's say 25. Because we don't want this filter to be cutting out as much as filter 1. And what will happen is, just the way this filter is moving, have a listen, because that LFO is modulating in such a way, it's going from a cycle of boosting the highs and then boosting the lows. And if we change the rate, you can really hear the effect. and we can like automate that in a very fun way. Especially if we also automate the frequency, you get some cool effects. So we drag it down. Yeah, I think 12 dB with no resonance at all is probably a good option. Okay, so we're going to group these. We're going to map the frequency to macro 1, map the resonance to macro 2, we'll map the rate to macro 3, and we'll map the depth to macro 4. So that should give us all the controls we need for this. Call it notch 1, notch 1 Q, notch 1 rate, and notch 1 depth. Now, I don't expect that we'll be modulating a lot of this stuff, but it's good to have the controls if we like want to change a few things. Set the rate to like 1 hertz, I suppose, and we're actually going to duplicate it because we'll use 2 instances of the same process. So all we have to do is change the names, notch 1 to notch 2 frequency, notch 2, notch 2 Q, notch 2 rate, and notch 2 depth. And what will be fun is how these different filters relate to each other. So just for the sake of simplicity, let's do 2 sweeps. One goes down and one goes up, and we'll just see how it sounds. So I'm just drawing it in, and we'll hear both the filters cutting into each other in a really cool way. So this is just notch 1. Here's both. Now I'm just testing different settings for the slope. And let's make this one like a faster moving sort of thing. Like that. And we add in the other filter. We're getting some pretty cool movement happening there already. It's a very wet signal. Okay, so let's name them notch 1, and then the next rack is of course notch 2. Great. So we'll continue on. And honestly, it's only till recently that I took these much further than that. And this used to be kind of as far as my bass design went, with different controls for where in the order I have the filters and that. Okay, so for the time being, we'll just set it up so it goes filter 1, filter 2, and then the 2 notches. So we're going to put them all into one giant group, and now we're going to do the mapping for that group. So just in order, filter 1 frequency goes to macro 1, morph macro 2, same for filter 2, so it goes 3 and 4. The notch can go 5 and 6. So I've used, what is it? We've used 6 macros there. And these other controls we have access to if we want them. And I stupidly should have been copying over the movement just so we can constantly hear the changes that we're making. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm just going to set it up so the movement that we'll put in is still going to be there. So I'm copying over, and after I copy, I map to the appropriate macro so we can get that movement in. And I'm just macroing in the kind of obvious order. All right, now we're up to the notches. And notches are actually kind of boring in the movements that they're making, but with time they'll become more interesting. Whoops, wrong notch. So go here, copy that one. So that's notch 1. Should go to unmap that one. So notch 1 goes to macro 5, and re-enable the automation, copy it, and notch 2 goes to macro 6. Be right back, just got to turn the heater off. Cool, I am back. So yeah, we've got a decent amount of movement happening there, and let's just compare no unison mode to a unison mode. Actually, I'll slow down that second notch. That's delete the automation. It's happening a bit too quick, so I'm just going to draw in some random shit. Some little sweepy things like that, that'll do. And let's try a slope of 24. That's cool. All right. So we're going to set it up so that this rack is within the mids rack. And then we're going to map it all appropriately. So I'm putting it in the mids rack, and then starting with macros 3, we're just going to go in order. So I'm going to duplicate it to save time when I copy things over. Yeah, so we're going to go macro 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That'll do. That keeps it nice and neat. And now I'm going to copy over the mapping controls from the first one and set it up. Paste, and oh god, we've got a freeze. Oh Jesus Christ. Come on, don't crash on me. Please don't crash. Oh no. Oh no, we survived the crash, good. Alright. So where were we? Macro 1 is done, macro 2. Copy that over. Control C. Control V, because I'm using Windows. I think it's Command is the other, you know, the Apple version. Copy that over. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to keep the movement in as the bass becomes more complicated. I don't want to have to go back and like re-macro in everything just for the purposes of like getting the sound variation that I want. I'd like to be able to just have it happening as I go. So now we're up to notches. Notch 1 and notch 2. Cool. Copy that. Notch 2. Yeah, so it should sound the same. And the difference is that now we're getting the cool movement where we can still feel the bass. So if we compare the original one, and what was happening there is the filter is filtering everything, including the lows. So it's only letting a few in. But now we've got this complicated filtering rack, and better name it filtering rack. Yep. And we'll call this mid split. Yeah. So now the filtering is only happening to the mids. And we can change it. So we can like bring it in and bring it out at will. So if we want the bass to really stand out at the start, we can drag it down. We can make it more extreme. We can bring it in and out at will. And we can even just bring that down even lower. So the bass will kick in right at the start. And we can duplicate that. That way we're really giving a lot of room for the bass. Because we're making the space that we need to do it. While at the same time the low is just plodding along. What is probably pretty obvious though is suddenly the mids are a lot more quiet. Like look at it. It's not even pushing 20 compared to the lows, which are like more than double the volume. And of course, because bass sounds aren't as loud as the higher frequency sounds to our perception, it's not such a big deal. But still, it's an issue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move around these filters a little bit. Maybe set it to 20% resonance with a 24 dB slope. And we're going to boost the signal because those notches really reduce the signal. So let's give it, say, 6. And let's check now. So a good way to tell your volume is to go into the session mode and just look at the meter, because it actually tells you what the peaks are. So at the moment it's negative infinity, and we can see about halfway through it gets up to negative 13 dB. Now to reset it, you just click it again, and we're going to boost the gain by another 3. So now we're at 9. Let's have a look. Let's try 12. Like, now we're really boosting it. And if we look at the bass, now together. And it's at this point that I think we're going to want to put a little bit of compression. So we're going to just drop in a compressor after filter 1. And we don't want the ratio to be too high. Let's go with 5 again. Release of, say, 75, but in this case we're going to give it a bit of a transient, so like 50 milliseconds is probably good. Bring the threshold down. And let's make the transient even smaller. See, we're not ducking out much. We're actually ducking out a very small amount. And it's good to see the actual output there, as it gives us an idea of how the volume is working and what happened there. Compression's actually a pretty important feature. So let's look at the output. And you've noticed that peak and transient kind of depends on the notches 1 and notch 2, how they're boosting. So I'm trying to capture that one. Let's make it 10. Yeah, that's good. I don't want to cut the transients too much. Cool. All right. So have the frequency split. Call it split. At about 200 is good, I think, because we don't want to remove too much of it. So far we've got our lows. Should probably look at the gain reduction there as well. Let's have a look at the output. So there's less transient happening there and more of like a actual solid thuds when the resonance kicks in. Cool. So we've come a decent way so far, and now we have to think about distortion and where we're going to put the distortion. But before we go further than that, let's just build our little distortion unit. So what we're going to be doing is just using Saturator and driving it. So I'm putting an instance of utility before Saturator so I can control the gain going in. Let's turn the low off. And let's turn the filtering rack off, because we want to be able to really hear what's happening, and sometimes it's easier just to set it up like that. I'm putting an oscilloscope on as well, because that will give me an idea of what kind of wave folding is happening. Okay, I don't think anyone else can see the oscilloscope, but that doesn't matter. So we're going to be clipping the saturator. So before I go any further, I'm going to put a limiter on so we don't damage our ears. matter how hard I drive it. It's only going to get so loud. Cool. Yeah, don't want to hurt our ears. That would be unpleasant. All right, cool. So let's think about saturation. Now, what happens when you saturate something is that signal goes through the saturator, and anything beyond a certain level at the saturator just gets cut off. So if you have a sine wave and you drive the shit out of it, I'll actually demonstrate that here. So we're just going to drop in operator, and we are going to put an oscilloscope, and we're also going to put an EQ because it's interesting to see both. So got EQ8. As you can hear, it's a sine wave, it's a single frequency. But what happens when you drive a saturator with it? We're going to start bringing out other frequencies. So use the utility volume, and if we boost the gain to a ridiculous extent, these other harmonics come out. And basically what's happening is we turn a sine wave into a square wave. And that's all that happens when you're using a saturator. Just changing the wave shape and bringing out more frequencies. So that's what we're doing here. And it's a matter of finding the tone that we want. So we're actually going to put two utilities. One is the initial gain boost, because we want to get the levels up so they're easy to control. Maybe 6 dB. And then we're going to use the second utility to drive it. Let's have a listen. And once you get that driven aspect, you can use these color controls to change the tone. Now, bass changes where the main frequency of the saturator is. And if we lower the bass, it focuses more on the lower frequencies to distort. And if we raise it, it focuses on the higher frequencies. Then you have the color frequency control, the width, and the depth. And they work in tandem to control the secondary filter. So if we set the depth to like -24 and the width to say 30 and play with the frequency, we can get different tones. It's almost like a TV 303 resonance control. It's really cool. We set the depth to super high frequency. In this instance, I don't want too many high frequencies, so we're going to have the bass at -4.5. The frequency at normal, the depth will find. Yeah, let's have it at like 3. Now we can try playing with the different distortion types. And I'm going to turn off the other oscillators so we only have the single one, just so we can see it better. Because it's often easier to kind of get the tones when it's a simpler signal chain. Let's try soft sine. It almost sounds like a kind of FM synthesis. It's actually a really nice sound. It somehow reminds me of people like putting their lips together and going. Bleh. Cool. Yeah, I think we are going to stick with that. Yeah, great. Okay, so let's group the saturator, and we need to control the outputs of it. So what's the best way to do that? We could use like an LFO to do the percentages, which is kind of what I'm inclined towards. So let's map the LFO, and we can actually just let it go. And just see what happens. That's kind of cool actually, but we don't want that. We just want to use the LFO as a controller. So when it's set to 0%, it's 0 dB. Yeah, that's the easiest way to do it. So we'll use the offset control, and we'll also use the gain control here. So we want it to go from 100%. Let's try to 0%. That actually sounds like the leveling's pretty good there. So let's compare 100%. It's 29, 0%. It's 18, but it sounds about the same. And let's try in the middle. Not bad. I'm going to bring it back a little bit because I want to get these levels balanced at the start. Yeah, that's cool. I like it. So call that sinoid drive, drive control. And that's simple. So map that to macro 1, call it sinoid drive, and go into the mapping and set the minimum to 0% and the maximum to 100. There's still a little bit too much gain happening there. What if we also use the control? No, I don't like that. Now we'll have to add another utility afterwards just to control the drive a little bit. So go into mapping, set the gain, we don't want it too high. So set it from 59, what's 0 going to be? That's pretty good. Let's bring the maximum up. Hitting 15, okay. Yeah, cool. All right, so we've done our little rack there. Let's call it a drive rack because we might actually add additional distortions. Now I'm going to have my lunch break and then I'll be returning a bit later on. So yeah, stream will be up soon.